the majority of our life, if you make a timeline from 1 to say 80, the average lifespan for a woman is 76 and for a man is 74. So let's say 80. So you can see that the most of our life is we're engaged in some form of work from the age of 20 right to the age of maybe 65. And most people hate their work. Worst day of the week is Monday morning, and their favorite day is Friday. So if we're not able to find fulfillment in what we do, we're actually setting ourselves up to be unhappy for the majority of our life.
Hello, my friends. We are back. We made it to another episode. You're listening to Be On Air, and I'm your host, Kaylee Marks. And boy, do I have a profound episode for you today. I'm really, truly excited that I get to bring this conversation to you. Tune in to the whole thing. There's a lot of wonderful topics that we get into. Today's guest is Simon Haas. He is an internationally renowned teacher of yoga philosophy, and what makes him really unique is he specializes in applying this ancient wisdom to everyday life, and he just has a way with words and a way with how he simplifies things. Simon graduated from the University of Cambridge, and he holds a master's in comparative religion from the University of Oxford. This gentleman is a scholar, and he has a heart of gold, and he is going to be sharing with you today from his book, Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul, The Soul's Journey to Sacred Love. And we'll be exploring how crisis and difficulty can form part of our life path and how we can write our life story with love and compassion. And some of the amazing things that you'll take away from this episode today, you'll learn what people on their deathbed report regretting the most in their life. You'll learn different ways for coping and getting through the most challenging times of our life. You'll learn some ancient wisdom from one of the most revered spiritual texts on earth, the Bhagavad-gita, and overcoming fear, overcoming our ego, overcoming attachment, how we can get out of our own way so that we can fully show up in this life. So please enjoy this episode. It is brought to you with a lot of love. Here we go. Simon, welcome so much to the show. Thank you for making time. I'm really excited to get to talk to you. And how are you doing today?
Thank you, Kaylee. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, things are very well. It's an honor to be on your show.
Where in the world are you right now?
I'm actually in Costa Rica, believe it or not. I'm wearing a sweater. It's a little bit cold at the moment. I'm not sure why.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You get the impression that Costa Rica is like pure tropical bliss weather all the time.
Normally it is. There's been climate change for sure. And
yes.
The weather patterns have changed now.
Yeah, we're starting to see that everywhere, right? And it's a crazy time on the planet. Maybe everyone always thinks that about the planet, but it certainly feels like the volume is being turned up or the heat is being turned up. And I couldn't think of a better time to talk about yoga and the dark night of the soul. And you're a wonderful author. You've written the Book of Dharma, Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul, and I have been loving both of them, especially Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul. Personally, I have probably gone through several of those Dark Nights of the Souls, but in particular lately this year, it has been one of the more challenging times of my life. And the words that the way that you are making the Bhagavad-gita accessible through your book is really astounding. And so I'm really excited to kind of open this up. But I wanted to start by asking you, how did you start writing? Like when was the first time that you really connected with the art of writing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I've always loved writing very much, but I've mostly written for myself. And then as I began studying the texts of India, I found that there's there's something of a cultural barrier presenting this incredible wisdom in the ancient texts of India to contemporary readers and audiences. So I began writing. When was this? Maybe 10 years ago now. When I started writing, perhaps 10 years ago, started writing the Book of Dharma. And the idea of that was to make those teachings from the sacred text of India really easy to understand and accessible to contemporary readers.
When you were younger, I'm just curious, like, would you write? Was that something that you were attracted to even from a young age, or is that something that you came to later in life?
I used to keep a personal diary for a while. I would write stories, especially short stories. I never shared anything of what I wrote. I kept it quite personal, quite private. As a teenager, I started writing poetry, and a lot of the poetry I wrote is quite existential, and devotional poetry also from the Bhakti tradition. I've always loved writing, but actually more than writing, I've been involved in helping others through editing.
Mm-hmm.
So editing the English translations of my teachers. I've spent many years working on that. So although I've been very interested in writing, most of my energy has gone towards supporting projects through editing.
Yeah, and we share a spiritual tradition and path, and in our tradition, there's writer after writer after writer after writer after writer after writer. It's like it's the line of writers, and one of the things that I feel like you've done amazingly with, especially yoga and the dark night of the soul, is really just made it so accessible, and you've brought it through a lens that I think anyone, whether you consider yourself spiritual or not, whether you consider yourself religious or not, whether you're interested in the sacred texts of India or not, you're going to get an enormous amount of benefit from this. And you've really opened it up and simplified. You bring out 4 steps of what the Bhagavad-gita illuminates. And I was wondering if maybe you could briefly share what those 4 steps are.
Yeah, sure. The first step is set out on the journey of the soul. And that's a particular that's encapsulated by the very first chapter of the Gita. And the way that Arjuna, the warrior, so the Gita, for those who are perhaps new to the topic, it's a battlefield dialogue, and it's a classic on yoga. And what's incredible about the Gita is the setting of it, because normally you would think that the Bhagavad-gita, you'd think that a text on wisdom would be shared in a forest setting, peaceful, the bank of a river or a lake. But here you have yoga teachings that are shared in the middle of a battlefield at the onset of war. So the setting is really quite peculiar, you might say. It definitely stands out. And a lot of that is because of so the texts of India are, the commentators over a long period of time, they've shown that these texts often have different levels of meaning, so different dimensions. So there's the literal dimension. There's often an ethical dimension. There's also a symbolic dimension. So the symbolism of the Gita is really quite important. And the battlefield is known as Kurukshetra. Kshetra means field, and Kuru comes from Kri, which means to do. So it's the field of action. So we're all on the field of action. And action is something we can't escape. Even when we decide not to do something, that's an action. It can have huge impacts for better or for worse. So the field of action can be very much like a battlefield. Unexpected changes in fortunes, frenetic, chaotic, and how to act, how to make the chaotic field of life a sacred place to act. So that's Arjuna's starting point, and he actually begins his journey from a place of crisis. So that's one step. one teaching in the Gita, and then you have a second teaching, which is, and these are like broad principles that you find in the Gita. So I'm going to refer to Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul. Let every step be its own reward. And those are the teachings of karma yoga in the Gita. You could say the first 6 chapters cover that. And now, how to put this in a way that is that really connects with people. So often in our life, the actions that we do, they're very much results based. So we're looking into the future, and the action itself, we may not find happiness or fulfillment in what it is we're actually doing. So I think, I don't know what's the age of retirement in the US.
Well, I guess it changes now. Everyone's like, you get these young retirees, but it seems like it's around 60 something, right? 60. Right. I don't know the exact age, but somewhere around there.
And people often begin work in their early 20s. So the majority of our life, if you make a timeline from 1 to say 80, the average lifespan for a woman is 76 and for a man is 74. So let's say 80. So you can see that the most of our life is we're engaged in some form of work from the age of 20 right to the age of maybe 65. And so I don't know what it's like in the US. In the UK, most people hate their work. Their worst day,
similar here.
Worst day of the week is Monday morning, and their favorite day is Friday. So if we're not able to find fulfillment in what we do, we're actually setting ourselves up to be unhappy for the majority of our life. So what Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita, teaches to Arjuna, the warrior, is how to find deep fulfillment in what we do, how to make what we do a yoga practice, so that yoga is not something that's restricted to the yoga studio or the yoga mat, but it's continuous practice that our yoga mat is the field of action, the field of life. So that's the second teaching.
Can we dive into there a little bit? Because each of these, this is a huge book, and each of these are infinite realms of exploration. But in there, I think it's so important because as creators, as authors, as speakers, as anyone who is trying to bring forward their mission and vision, it's so easy to get locked in this results oriented.
Right.
I need to earn this. I need to make this amount happen. I need to grow my audience by this amount. And only then will I be happy, satisfied, fulfilled. And it's this constant yearning and striving. And then we never arrive. And so what I'm really getting from the second point is like arrive in every moment of the journey in union with the supreme goal. And I'm curious, like, as you are out there and sharing your work and stuff, how do you keep that in front of your mind? Because it's hard for me. I'll totally get distracted and just start looking at the goal and kind of lose track, and I won't let each step be the reward. And I'm wondering, how do you personally kind of manage that?
I try to follow 3 steps, and I don't always succeed, admittedly. It's a continuous endeavor. So the first step is to be true to who we are, to be true to our nature. We're not all built the same way. And maybe that's one big failing of our educational system, that it assumes that everyone's the same, like a cookie cutter approach. But we have a unique unique personality, a unique set of innate skills. Some of those we can develop over time, but there is so much to us that is unique. And so the first step, the first part of karma yoga, is to be true to who we are. I don't know if you've heard of a nurse named Bronnie Ware. She's quite recently published a book on patients that she was speaking to. So she's a palliative nurse, and that means she was caring for patients who were in their final days. I'm not sure if she's still doing that now. So she thought to herself, I'm not simply going to care for these patients as best as I can. Maybe I can also learn from them. So she began asking them questions. What in your life has gone well? What would you do differently if you could start over? And what's your number one regret? And there was one regret that kept coming up again and again and again. The number one regret of dying patients. I wish I'd had the courage to be true to myself rather than try and live up to the expectations of everyone else. It was the number one regret.
Wow. Wow.
And that's what Krishna tells Arjuna in the Gita. He says, thousands of years earlier, he says it's better to follow your path, even if you make mistakes, than to follow someone else's path and execute that perfectly. So we can have all the trappings of success. We can have the status symbols, the bank account, the large house, whatever it is, however, we think it needs to be measured. But if we're not doing what we're supposed to do, if we're not acting in a way that's aligned with who we are, we'll never feel, there will always be a sense of a lack of fulfillment. So that's definitely something that I try to do. Now, it's not always easy because we often have to do things that maybe don't align with who we are. But I found in my life, at least, that if we make a space, even if it's a small space, for what is true to who we are, that is deeply enriching, and that space begins to grow. It's quite extraordinary. It just begins to grow. We may soon find ourselves just doing that.
That is so powerful. And it seems like that exploration of being true to ourselves requires a lot of discernment, which would probably lead us to the third subject of the book, or of the Gita, right? Which is let discernment be the warrior's sword. Right. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Those are the three, those are the final 6 chapters of the Gita. And they are a collection of teachings from the Sankhya tradition, the ancient Sankhya tradition of India.
And that just for the listeners, so Sankhya, would that be considered sort of like logic and philosophy, and kind of like how to tell what is what in reality? I'm not sure how you would describe it.
It's quite close to that. Sometimes Sankhya is translated as enumeration, but it's much more than that, because it's actually something that is meant to be lived. And so the teachings of the Gita and in India in general are not meant to deliver information. They're designed to transmit or deliver transformation. And so the Sankhya teachings are not meant to be simply kind of contemplated, but actually lived in our life. So probably a better translation, in a way, is the word discernment. So Sankhya allows us to be very discerning in the way we live our life. Now, the yoga teachings of Patanjali, which many viewers will be familiar with, the basis of that, or the foundation of that, is in terms of yoga philosophy, is Sankhya. So Sankhya is the basis of most of the yoga that we practice and know about, at least in the contemporary Western world. So an example of Sankhya is the 3 gunas. There are 3 qualities that color our perception and make up the world: sattva, rajas, and tamas. And being able to discern the various qualities, these 3 qualities, and how they interact with each other, is a form of yoga. So this is what's really fascinating about the Gita, is that there are 18 systems of yoga, 18 chapters, each one is a system of yoga. And they're very powerful systems. Even focusing on a single one of them that there may be different systems will attract or draw different people according to who they are and their preferences. So the system of yoga that is the three gunas, you can apply it in anything. So I'll give you an example. In communication, for example. So communication that is destructive in its nature. So putting people down, trying to dismantle what they're saying, criticism, self-criticism too, of a particular quality. If there's certain type of destructive self-talk that is also in tamas. Tamas literally means darkness. So that kind of communication is in tamas, and it has particular results that come from that. There's another type of communication, and that's in rajas. And rajas is the energy that creates things. So if we have a conversation and I'm trying to convince you of something, or I'm trying to prove that I'm right, or I have some other agenda like that, that is conversation or communication in rajas. Mm-hmm. And then the highest form of communication is in sattva, and it has a completely different quality. It's when two people are able to suspend their agenda in that moment, and they're truly present to the conversation, and they're able to listen to each other. And the result of that is remarkable. And we've all had experience of these kinds of conversations. There's vitality and intimacy. You develop intimacy with the other person. You have this sense that that other person has really has looked into your world. There's been a connection, soul to soul connection, and that's communication in sattva. So the Sankhya teachings are all about different qualities and different aspects of the world and how to differentiate between them.
And so this is the sort of discernment is learning how to perceive that we are actually at all times being swayed by these different energies, and with that knowledge, it gives us that, it's like that awareness, just like in any sort of psychological system of the modern time, right? Having awareness over something then gives us that freedom to start to create change in a little bit more space.
That's exactly right. And the most important part of Sankhya is understanding that we're not this physical body, and we're not the story that we inhabit. So we all create this story that we take so seriously. And we carry that story with us wherever we go. We think we're the central character in that story. And to have a story is not a problem. But when we forget it's just a story, and we take it so seriously, we're prepared to even lose friends over it, then that story binds us, it entraps us. And so maybe the most important teaching of Sankhya is to understand those aspects of the world that we are not. So that wisdom is compared to a sword because it severs our illusions. And it's the illusions that we hold on to that cause suffering associated with time, fear, lamentation, and confusion. Fear is suffering associated with the future, lamentation, suffering associated with the past, and confusion with the present. So interestingly, the Gita, for viewers who have a particular interest in the Gita, the very first verse of the Gita is about a blind emperor who is the root cause of this whole battle. That whole conflict is brought about because of his deep attachment to his own story. And in the opening verse, he's relating his own story, which is filled with fear, ego, and attachment. And the Gita begins that way because that's the dominant way in general that we approach life.
You mention in the book too, sort of two sides of the dark night of the soul, sort of the conscious, I'm really struggling right now, I'm going through the dark night, and then Dhritarashtra, the blind king, right, he represents this sort of shadow dark night of the soul that we're not even aware of. And that distinction is very interesting. And this also ties into this idea of like discernment and cutting through ignorance, because he's so wrapped up in his story, he's not even aware of sort of that his fate is sealed in a way.
Right. Yes, this is a very deep teaching from the sacred text of India, that the various dark nights of the soul or existential crises that we'll experience, they emerge from a deeper dark night that we might not even be aware, that in general we're not aware of, and that's known as in Sanskrit as avidya, and it's a lack of knowledge. But by knowledge, it's not referring to intellectual understanding, but awareness, perception of who we are. We're much greater than the small human story that we hold on to and try and live out. And in fact, that's what creates the existential crisis, when circumstances in the world come about that rupture the fabric of our small human story that we're clinging to. And then suddenly we find ourselves adrift. We find ourselves without purpose and meaning. And that's the underlying cause of the dark night of the soul that we might experience from time to time in our life.
Yes, and this avidya, or the ignorance, that in the Gita, it's subtly demonstrated how one rises out of that. And so before we get into the fourth teaching of the Gita, I was actually wondering if you could maybe talk about how it is that you found your spiritual teacher and how he helped you learn all these amazing things and go through your own process with this. And maybe you could, you share the story in the book, but maybe you could share that with the listeners now, because it's really beautiful.
Originally, I was interested in archaeology, and I began studying archaeology, and I had heard about an archaeologist named Schliemann. And Schliemann, he went to Greece and to what today is Turkey, and he was looking for the city of Troy. At that time, the classics, the ancient Greek classics, were considered just to be stories with no historical foundations or no historical truth to them. So he thought he suspected that there was more to it than that. So he began exploring, and he discovered the foundations of the city of Troy and so on. So from a young age, I was reading the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and I thought I would like to go on an expedition in the future, help be part of a team, and maybe excavate the ancient city of Dwarka, the Krishna's island city. And I began studying Sanskrit and the texts of India. And gradually my focus shifted, because I became less interested in looking for physical artifacts, because I began seeing that there's a huge treasure in these ancient texts. It speaks about a wisdom to overcome suffering associated with time. Imagine that. And so much more. So then in my study of the Bhagavad-gita and other texts, I reached a bit of a dead end, because I wasn't able to enter into those teachings deeply. And the reason for that is that these are not self-help books. So the genre of self-help didn't exist. It's our own more recent kind of invention. So these texts are actually designed more as teaching manuals. Everything is contained in something of a codified form. Well, they're in Sanskrit, but also there's so much meaning packed into each Sanskrit verse, like a universe of meaning. And a teacher normally will spend a lot of time unpacking that. So I traveled to India as a teenager, and I was very eager to meet a teacher. And I in my heart, I prayed for a teacher who, in the Gita, describes someone who is tattvadarshi, who is a truth seer. So not just someone who, has maybe memorized or learned a lot.
Has a certificate
right.
on their wall.
That's right. That's right. And the land of, there's one area of India known as Braj, which is Mathura, and it's in Uttar Pradesh, and it's considered a very sacred, a magical land. So I traveled there, and this is the birthplace of Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita. So I thought I should go there, and it was following a particular what's known as a parikrama, a certain type of pilgrimage, where but on a particular day, it's known as Ekadashi. Ekadashi is the 11th day of the new moon and 11th day of following the full moon. And traditionally in India, and this has been happening for hundreds or thousands of years, pilgrims will come from different places and make a circle, walking barefoot all around the ancient town of Vrindavan, where I was staying. And some people would also do that in a different way. They would prostrate themselves on the ground, and they would have like a stone. I don't know, I'll use this crystal, actually more like this one actually. They would have like a stone that you'd find on the side of the path, and you extend and you place it in front of you. And that's known as a Dandavat pranam. It's actually something that is a part of yoga that is a little bit lost in translation in the West. Not so many know about it. But it's a practice of prostration, which is designed to, it closes down the illusory ego and awakens a prayerful sense of humility in the heart, where you're really letting go of the burden that we carry in our life, this story that we carry of who we are and how we're important or going to become important, or all of these ideas that we have, which are so weighty and so noisy that we're not able to really hear anything beyond that. So this practice, we surrender that, we let that go. And so in this particular practice, you do a prostration, place a stone in front of you, and then get up again and go right behind the stone that you've left and do that again. And you cover how many kilometers or miles is it? I think it's like 12.
It's a lot walking with shoes. It's a lot walking without shoes. And then if you add in this amazing full body bow on the ground, one rock at a time, it's mind blowing and hard to conceive of. It's something I saw other people do, and I was like, yeah, I'll probably never do that. That looks really, really hard. So you're moving, you're taking a stone, you're doing a full bow, you're putting the stone in front of you, and then are you doing that with one stone?
With one stone, yeah.
And you just keep moving it.
Some people, they do that with a larger number. So I've seen some people do that with 108 stones. Many do it with one stone, and that's what I was doing. It took me 3 days to complete that.
Wow.
And but it was just the most incredible experience. And in that
did you have an intention when you started out? I recall in the book there was sort of a seed, right?
My intention was to pray for a teacher, to pray for a tattvadarshi teacher who could guide me on my spiritual journey, on the journey of the soul. And very shortly after that, I met my teacher, and I knew immediately upon seeing him that I had found my teacher. I'd found that my prayer had been heard.
You describe in the book, he sort of, the first thing he said to you was quite mystical and specific, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, when I was younger, as a child, I lost my mother at the age of 4. And I never speak about it. Actually, the first time I've ever mentioned it is in this book. Normally, I even met quite a few friends of mine didn't really know this, and so there are various challenges that we experience in life that are quite formative and that make us who we are, and play an important role or part or an influence in the directions that we take. So maybe my I would say that part of my search in life has been because of these various challenges that happened when I was young. And when I met my teacher for the first time, we exchanged a few words. And one of the first things he said to me is, he looked at me very deeply. And it felt very much like he was scanning lifetimes, many births. And he said to me, remember always, I am your mother.
Wow, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful to have someone connect in with your, almost like your inmost desire and your inmost pain. And you're saying tattva darshini, like to see, to know the truth of your heart and to be able to communicate and connect with that. That's extremely profound, and especially after doing this sacrifice. And as you were telling that story, it gave me this understanding of let each step be its reward. It feels like you're really forced to realize that truth of like each step is the reward on the path, because you're not really getting anywhere very quickly, and you have to be okay for the next however many hours kind of not making a lot of progress in the external world potentially.
That's right.
So one of the things that I've gotten from the book is this idea of accepting the pain and suffering and hard times. And we are so averse to it, and we do everything we can in the modern world to have the right AC unit and have the comfortable bed and have the anti-aging supplements and do all the things to extend life. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. I'm not saying that's wrong or anything, but we really are struggling against this inevitable end. And one of the things you're really bringing out, and that the Gita is really sharing with us, is to surrender to the way that God wants it, to the way that our soul's unfolding will happen. And there's the fourth teaching of the book. Maybe this will lead into that, right? What is the point of accepting suffering, and what the Gita talks about is love, but more specifically sacred love. So maybe you could share about that.
So yeah, in the contemporary Western world, we very much tried to avoid suffering at all costs, and in particular crisis. So there's a stigma attached to crisis, and each one of us at some point in our life will go through a period of intense difficulty, a dark night of the soul. So in Sanskrit, that's referred to as Vishad. Vishad literally means despair, or you can say crisis. And a dark night of the soul is not like, a bad day at work. Dark night of the soul is really the collapse of meaning in our life. It's a very difficult experience. Now, one thing I don't want to romanticize difficulty and pain and suffering. That's the texts of India don't do that. This slogan that bodybuilders have, no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
That's not a yoga teaching. In fact, one of the definitions that Krishna gives of yoga is dukkha samyoga viyogam. Yoga is breaking our connection to suffering. So, but inevitably, pain and difficulty will come our way. And how do we navigate that? There's not so much certainly in my upbringing and education, there was not so much to help me with that. Generally, if someone goes through a very difficult episode, they are medicated. And sometimes for clinical depression, for example, that's necessary and that's helpful. But a lot of a dark night of the soul need not be depressive. And yet it's a very difficult and a challenging period. And we will often, when we experience that, we'll think something's wrong with me. And we'll try and hide it. We'll try and resist it, avoid it. We may try to do that through alcohol and drugs, or many different ways to try and just avoid that. But in ancient India and in other cultures, the dark night of the soul is looked upon very differently. It's regarded as a sacred rite of passage. And so much so that in the Gita, it's accorded the title of a yoga system, Vishad Yoga, the yoga of crisis. And that can be, it can be really quite transformative. We see that many of the most incredible artists, musicians, authors, they composed their most magnificent work after a dark night of the soul. Because what a dark night of the soul will sometimes do, or often do, is we will emerge from that and relinquish the kind of facile mask or identity that we present to the world. We may just give that up, and it can really deepen the soul.
The whole world feels like it went through a dark night of the soul in 2020, and maybe there was the Dhritarashtra style avidya dark night happening anyway, but it became way more apparent. It was an eruption for the whole planet, and we have environmental collapse. We have the collapse of all these ecosystems. We have social justice and equality issues being brought up that needs to be brought up in almost every part of the world. We have the massive health crisis. So there's all these things, the meaning, the fabric of what we thought, the status quo was, or how tomorrow would be, is really becoming clear that we actually have no control over that. And we are all on this amazing spherical, maybe this amazing globe rolling through the galaxies, right, at thousands of miles an hour, completely at the mercy of the cosmos. And it is a time, the more people I speak to, the more journeys I'm hearing about of people going through this. And we aren't necessarily given a ton of really effective tools to handle this, mainly because we think we need to avoid pain too. Everything is trying to escape. And so, your book and the Gita and the sacred texts and the like you said, the training methodologies of the yoga systems are designed to disconnect us, or not disconnect us, but to help us kind of align with our true self. And that true self isn't a self that experiences temporary suffering.
Could I say a little bit about Krishna's teachings on pain and suffering?
Please, yes.
Because that's an immediate and natural response or question we may have. Okay, it's all very well having yoga teachings about crisis, but in the crisis that I'm experiencing, there's just so much suffering. What do I do with that? How do I navigate that? So Krishna addresses that very early on. He says to Arjuna, Matra sparshas tu konteya shitoshna sukha dukada agama pahino nityam tangstitikshasva bharata. And the verse that comes after that as well. Krishna tells Arjuna that there's a difference. He explains that there's a difference between pain and suffering. So pain is inevitable. In our life, there's a certain amount of pain that we will experience. But suffering is optional. So suffering is the story we create around our pain. So Krishna describes in this verse in the Gita that pain is like heat and cold, or Shita and Ushna. So heat and cold, or winter and summer. So winter and summer will come. There's not much you can do about it. Krishna says, don't be distracted by it. In other words, don't create a story around it. So when I was in India, I had my own experience of this that helped me understand what Krishna is trying to say to Arjuna. So in Uttar Pradesh, in the summer, it's incredibly hot, Kelly. I don't know if you've experienced it in the summer.
I try and avoid it. I think I left right before for Jagannath Puri, right before it got really hot.
Smart decision. It's like if you have an oven and you put it on 350 or 400 degrees for an hour, and then you open up the door and that hot wind that blows at you, that's what it's like in the afternoon if you step outside. And no one does, it's empty. The animals, you won't even see animals out at that time. So
there's no AC either, basically, right?
No AC. The electricity is cutting, so the little fan that you have is of not much use.
Sporadically cuts out.
And I was, as a monk living in the temple monasteries in Vrindavan and Mathura, I stayed over the summer, and it was incredibly difficult. And the whole time I was thinking, why did I make this decision? I should have gone home. I should have gone to the Himalayas, like that. And then I looked around me. At one point in that experience, I looked around me and I saw that the locals were just not troubled in the same way that I was. And even the children, you see them playing and laughing and going about their daily life. And there I was in absolute agony. And I understood in that moment that most of the difficulty was not the heat. It was the continuous speaking of the mind, the story I was creating around that. So I was thinking the whole time, I need to get out. When is the rainy season coming? Oh no, the fan has stopped again.
You've made the wrong decision. This isn't the right thing.
So just being aware of that kind of stopped that continuous speaking of the mind. And then the rest of the summer was really not that difficult in comparison to the first half. And that's what Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna. When we are so intent on escaping, on avoidance, avoiding pain, then we actually enhance or we strengthen the story that we create around that. And that's suffering. You can say there's pain and there's suffering. Suffering is the pain of pain. And that's optional. So Krishna teaches Arjuna how there's a certain amount of pain and pleasure in our life. But the suffering that we experience is the story we create around that.
And so he goes on to say, let sacred love be your goal. And that feels to me like the way through this. And so how do we practically in this world we find ourselves in, with pain, with suffering, with utility bills, with pollution, with all this stuff, how do we cultivate this goal of sacred love? And what is that?
That's great. As someone who practices yoga, this particular teaching is potentially, for anyone, for that matter, but it's life transforming, because we tend to focus a lot on other aspects of our life. So, we may invest tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of dollars in our education, in improving our mind and our knowledge. But where are the schools that teach us how to strengthen our ability to love? How to, where are the schools of the heart? So all yoga systems and any spiritual journey, if it's softening our heart, it's a very good sign. If our practice is hardening our heart, then something is wrong in our practice. So this is maybe a first step in this culture of culture of the heart, culture of love and affection, to become more aware. Well, first of all, to make sacred love the goal of our life, the goal of our practice, and to be more aware of the condition of our own heart in whatever it is that we're doing. So, even in any, day-to-day projects, or if we are at work, how are we thinking, speaking, and acting? Is it a way? Is it part of our yoga practice, our culture of love and affection, or is it opposed to that? If it's opposed, it's not yoga, but it's known as viyoga, or that which takes us in the opposite direction to our spiritual yoga practice. Now, broadly speaking, there are two types of love. And the sacred texts of India speak about this. You could call them small love and sacred love. And they're quite different to each other. So small love is love that's very much tied to the small human story that we have. It's conditional. And we love someone for when they love us. It's temporary, which leads to the astonishing. I've always found this astonishing, how two people can declare their undying love for each other, and a year later they could be declaring their undying hatred for each other in the divorce courts. So that's because of the conditional and temporary nature of small love. Another characteristic of small love is that it's very limited. So it's limited to our immediate family and friends. And it's not a love that extends to all people. Sacred love is the opposite. So instead of conditional, it's unconditional. And instead of being temporary, it isn't temporary. And so it's not a love that is broken. And it extends to all people, to all beings, not just to a few who who may serve our imagined interests in the small story of our life. So small love is represented by the opening verse of the Gita, where Dhritarashtra is expressing his fear and his love for his sons, Duryodhana. He's expressing small love there. His conditional, temporary small love based on his story, which sees the world in terms of friend and enemy. Now, the culture of sacred love is a topic of many sacred texts, especially in our Bhakti tradition. And the way that sacred love is cultured in our tradition is by focusing it on the soul of the universe. The soul of the universe, according to the teachings of ancient India, is present in the heart of each one of us. And by directing our love there, we automatically direct our love and affection to all beings, necessarily. So an analogy that's often used to explain this is watering the root of a tree. If you water the root of the tree, automatically the leaves and flowers, that love extends to the leaves and flowers in all parts of the tree. So if imagine you have a beautiful tree, full of flowers. You can look after the individual leaves and flowers, and that's one approach, and it's a well-meaning approach, but it's limited. You'll only be able to do that for the leaves and flowers you can reach. But if we focus our dedication and love to the root of that tree, it nourishes all parts of the tree. So in the same way, someone who, a yoga practitioner, who makes that connection with divinity within them, with the soul of the soul, or the soul of the universe, that making that connection is known as yoga. And the result of that is you've experienced, everyone is your family. No one is a stranger. And you have respect and deep love and affection for all beings. Actually, respect, the word respect comes from the Latin respicere, which means to see or to behold. So true respect for others is being able to see them beyond our own and their own stories. To be able to see someone else on the level of the sacred self, beyond the stories that we're living out in this temporary world.
That's so beautiful.
That encapsulates some of the teachings on bhakti or sacred love.
And I mean, there's so much that we could go into for literally eons on each of these points and each of these subjects, but that was so beautifully shared. And in your book, you go through each of these 4 things that we've outlined in much more detail and more. And then you have the Book of Dharma. I'm curious, as a result of writing this and sharing it with your community in the world and traveling around, what's something beautiful or inspiring that's come about after having published this book?
With the Book of Dharma and Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul, it's been an opportunity to connect with so many people in a way that I would have never had the chance to do so. So, because in this book, in both books, I share quite a few personal and really quite, I don't know, I would say private details about my life and my own journey. So I make myself quite vulnerable in doing that, which was not so easy to do actually for me. I tend to be quite a private person, quite a shy person. So the result of that, though, is that so many have written and shared and expressed challenges that they are facing or have faced, and aspects of their life that they're looking to improve, and or that have been that have changed dramatically as a result of applying some of these teachings. And that's been such a joy. One thing that I've tried to do with these books is that, well, should I share this? Okay, I will. I try to make them part of my practice of devotion, my practice of bhakti. So any funds that come from book sales, for example, all of that goes towards really special causes. So there's Sandipani Muni School in India, which is a school for young girls from very difficult backgrounds. There's a lot of poverty in India, and often young girls are married at a very young age. Mm-hmm. And to avoid that and help young girls get the education that's the same education opportunities of education as others, right up the way to university, they have these schools, Sandipani Muni School, and so I've been supporting that, and also the giving out of medical supplies and food to thousands of people in the area of Vrindavan, right where I lived as a monk for so many years. And just the joy of these kinds of projects it's been such a joy. And the credit goes to the readers, because this is it, these are I see this as contributions from the readers to these incredible projects, and so that's been another like silver lining or something very special or dear to my heart that's come out of this project.
What a beautiful gem to be able to accomplish so many things with one activity, like expressing yourself, sharing your journey, sharing medicine and tools that will help people through suffering, and at the same time honoring your lineage and your teachers, and at the same time creating impact. And I love that. I mean, that's why I love podcasting, why I love writing. I believe that the platform itself has such a tremendous power to connect us all and to channel funds where they need to go. And that's so inspiring. And thank you for sharing that with us. And, everyone, you can go to simonhaas.com. That's SIMONHAAS.com. You can also obviously find his books on Amazon. What is the best way for people if they wanted to connect with you or just see what you're up to? Is it your website? Do you have a social platform that you're more active on? What's the best way?
Probably my website, simonhaas.com. Although I'm also on Facebook, and you'll be able to find me there as well.
Amazing. And I mean, this has been such a deep dive and so many topics that I would love to just go on forever. But, we're here at time. It's been so wonderful having you on the show. And I really recommend everyone go check out Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul and his other book, the Book of Dharma. These are both amazing reads, very engaging, every page, so easy to read, yet they are extraordinarily packed full with meaning and depth. And, I feel like you've done an amazing job taking Sanskrit, which is so condensed and deep, and opening it up for, modern readers to consume. So thank you so much for your service and what you're doing out there, Simon. And thank you for coming on the show.
Kaylee, thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved this conversation with you.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Be On Air. I hope you enjoyed it and are now one step closer to turning on your microphone and broadcasting your message to the world. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how I can help you on your broadcasting journey by getting in touch with me and maybe even apply for a strategy session if you want to discuss your podcast idea. You can reach me at www.podcast-farm.com. Till next time, my friends, I'm Kaylee Marks, and thanks for tuning in to Be On Air.